This episode of Avatar: The Last Airbender is, in my opinion, the best episode from Season 1. Not only that, but it also does something really powerful that I think we can learn from. In the run-up to Netflix's adaptation, which will probably be out by the time this video is released, I thought to make 3 videos discussing the 3 best episodes from Season 1 of the original. I've discussed the fortune teller and how powerful story can be even when lacking plot. I've discussed the storm and how to deliver good character exposition as well as tying different arcs to a single metaphor, and now the best episode of Season 1, or at least my favourite. Unless whatever thumbnail I design has made it obvious, you have the length of my intro to try and guess what this episode is. It's the Great Divide! It's the Great Divide. It's not the Great Divide. Although there are things I'd like to say about that episode one day. No, it's episode 16 of Season 1, The Deserter. Now, in a way, it's strange for me to score this my favourite episode, because I also think it has more flaws than my number 2 and 3 on the list. For example, this is the episode where Aang meets the ex-Fire Nation Admiral Jeong-Jeong, who teaches Aang some firebending, but in Aang's eagerness to create fire, he accidentally burns Katara. I think moments like that this episode could be better executed. It's slightly rushed. You don't particularly see or feel the impact of Aang's fire. Katara just runs off crying without a word and Sokka becomes angry. It's not bad, but I think you could make the danger of fire really hit in this moment. I similarly think they don't sit with Katara's feelings long enough right after. She pretty much immediately puts her hands in the water and then realises she knows how to heal burns. You know, that's such an important beat, learning healing. It deserves longer than 10 seconds to express it. That said, it's still my favourite episode, and one good reason for that is that it hooked me on bending as a magic system. One of, if not my favourite things from any fantasy stories are when they can imbue magic or fighting styles with a strong sense of philosophy or meaning. And there are obviously many examples where the show does this, the way different elements have their own unique fighting styles based on different martial arts. How, like, airbending involves rotation and evasion, earthbending is staunch and head-on, and the main episode in which Toph gets to teach Aang earthbending comes as a great way to explore Aang's difficulties with facing up to conflict head-on. You know, the magic system becomes a perfect means to explore his emotion there. This episode is about fire, though, taking the core of what that element really is and expanding what it would mean to people and can mean in the story itself. It is dangerous and destructive and requires incredible discipline that can be at odds with such an eager, excitable child as Aang. Fire itself becomes the principal character conflict here. I think that's great. And you know, magic-wise, like, even as a kid who once enjoyed Harry Potter, I can remember being a bit frustrated that that was a school all about learning magic, and yet you rarely got a sense that anything of substance was actually being learned by the students, other than, like, which words to say and how to swish a wand. There's nothing meaningful there, you know? Potions class is literally just cooking, but without the creativity or the artistic side of cooking. It's just following instructions to put stuff in a cauldron, to such an extent that when Harry finds a different book with better instructions, he turns from an awful potion maker to suddenly the best in the class. Like, that's it. Just follow a textbook. That's what the whole magic around potions relies upon. I can remember seeing the third film in a cinema and it introduced the idea of Patronus spells, and I remember thinking, okay, this is pretty cool. You can feel how that works as a spell and how they have to train at it, how it's difficult to master. Using Patronus spells is like an internal battle against depression and is trying to maintain inner hope. and joy. There's something the story is expressing there, and something tangible for these characters to actually learn. I mean, I probably didn't think that consciously as a kid. I probably just thought it looked cool, but never mind. That's one good moment in those stories, but generally the magic there just feels like a load of bob. And to continue this tangent for like another 10 seconds, this is where people would normally start talking about different magic systems. There are soft magic systems and hard magic systems, each requiring differing levels of consistent rules. But really the main thing that makes magic feel alive and interesting and impactful for me to read about is whether or not you're expressing anything through it. You know, the internal battle of maintaining joy in the face of despair is an important theme. The struggle here to control your anger and your impatience through discipline is an important theme. Magic gains an extra layer when aspects of it become symbolic for something integral to the characters and to the story. Like even last video I spoke about what creating and redirecting lightning can symbolize, but like also Iroh teaching Zuko how to redirect lightning in this story is meaningful in that it requires adopting waterbending technique to teach. That's meaningful because it's teaching Zuko to appreciate the other elements rather than stay trapped within the Fire Nation is the best ideology, you see? It's about magic, but it's actually exploring character and theme and offering organic ways for Zuko to grow there. That's so good, but I'm supposed to be talking about this episode. First, some stuff happens, and then they learn that this great firebending master is nearby who deserted from the Fire Nation Navy. Aang then wants to be trained by him, but Jeong flat out refuses to do so. Aang hasn't yet mastered water or earth, he has no discipline, he is too weak in his words.
You are too weak!
The fact he is such a hard disciplinarian does obviously make sense because he clearly values the importance of discipline, but calling the Avatar weak is an interesting choice of words that we'll return to in a moment. There's also this faintly sort of Zhuangzi line about destiny.
What would a boy know of destiny? If a fish lives its whole life in this river, does he know the river's destiny? No! Only that it runs on and on, out of his control. He may follow where it flows, but he cannot see the end. He cannot imagine the ocean.
Jeong is a wise figure. We're told from the off that he's someone enlightened, and you can sense his wisdom, yet there's also a lot of fear in this speech, you know? The way he talks, the idea of destiny flowing far beyond your own vision and hopes, beyond anything you could possibly control. Who hurts this old, scarred man? We don't know exactly what trauma Jeong has faced, but as an ex-admiral we might be able to imagine what he has seen and experienced and no doubt played a hand in causing. The Fire Nation has caused so much death in this world, and now Jeong has quite literally turned away. Far from Fire Nation society, he sits within the dark of a tent, only small candles for light, no greater fire, no proximity to the sun. He's not interested in training Aang, he's not interested in training anyone. Fire is so destructive that he has shut himself away as a total hermit. It confuses Aang. But Avatar Roku appears and convinces Jeong of the importance, so they do begin training, but Aang is impatient with this man. Aang wants to do more than just breathe and meditate all the time. He wants to actually learn firebending, to actually start shooting fireballs. Jeong won't let him, and again this makes a lot of conscious sense. Fire is dangerous, and discipline absolutely matters, but at the same time, he also sounds kind of afraid. Every time Aang is an excitable child who wants to make fire, Jeong seems to react like Aang is a destructive monster, like he's seeking power, like he's Ozai or Zhao. Like that's what firebending will cause this avatar to turn into. Jeong doesn't want a hand in training him to become that. And oh, that's when you realise this isn't just about the importance of maintaining discipline here. It is also about the importance of not letting fear suffocate all your hope, not letting it paralyse your decisions and your actions. At what point does discipline and restraint hold you back from doing what's right? You see, Aang does come to understand what Jeong has been trying to tell him. Once his impatience leads to just making fire anyway, he then accidentally burns Katara, and Aang feels horrible about that. Now he understands fire is destructive. Aang then encounters Zhao, who draws on rage for his firebending, and he leads Zhao to quite pathetically end up setting his own ships on fire when, you know, a child simply taunts him a little bit. And so, out of all of that, Aang makes the decision to never firebend ever again. It is too dangerous. That's his arc this episode. And it's a bad decision. Aang learns the wrong thing. Jeong-jeong is so afraid of firebending's destructive nature that his literal attempts to train Aang in firebending ends up teaching him to never do it ever again, to shut it away. That's pretty cool, isn't it? And this is actually where we come to the point that impresses me most about this episode. I'm going to discuss that after I don't even know how to, like, segue into World Anvil anymore.
Jugglers, benders, magicians. This would be a great place for me to study some real
world building. World Anvil! Yep, they sponsored this video, they're still here, hopefully they'll stay here. World Anvil is an online tool for building worlds, creating characters, designing and managing campaigns for a whole slew of games. Sleuth isn't the right word, I don't know why I said that. Look, you can do all that, you can plan and write stories, you can do all sorts of different stuff for creative projects. I use it for the world building of my novel because my old system of massive Word documents became far too chaotic. Not only does the ability to create timelines with hyperlinks branching off to specific characters or articles or a billion other things, not only does that make it so much easier to quickly find the information I need, it also makes it so much easier to plan things out and kind of keep going. Sometimes a blank Word document for world building is very daunting, so having all sorts of tools to help with visualization, to help you figure out what needs planning next, to keep your brain fizzing and unimpeded, because all of the tools are very straightforward and easy to use. That's really important to me. It's like the sharper an artist's pencils, the freer they are to focus on the art. World Anvil is a very sharp pencil. You can create mind maps, you can rearrange elements of your story, do all sorts of campaign related things for that sleuth of games I mentioned. Yes, link in the description and as a pinned comment should you desire a 51% discount on all their subscriptions, or if you're not yet sure, then try out the free version for as long as you like. That's what I did at first, and now look where I am, shouting their name at you through a screen. World Anvil! The best thing about this episode is that it sets up a problem and then has the boldness, the sheer audacity to not resolve it for another 2 seasons. Aang vows to never firebend again. That doesn't truly change until episode 13 of season 3, where he and Zuko meet the Sun Warriors. This is primarily a children's show, and the ability to trust the intelligence of kids there to leave this for so long, I think that's great. Which is then when we open the philosophy bag again to once more explore deeper emotional and philosophical themes via the magic system, at the point that will be the most impactful for Aang's character as a whole, and also for Zuko's. We return again to firebending and discover now that no, fire isn't just a destructive, dangerous force for the power hungry. It is also something deeply beautiful. Fire provides light, heat, nourishment to the world. We depend on the sun, and it is a magical, wonderful thing. Yes, it still requires discipline, and fire can turn reckless, but instead of drawing on your inner rage to fuel it, you can draw on light and love and ideas of harmony. After this episode, Zuko stops making his angry grunts with all his firebending. He is quiet and at peace within. I veered off again though, I'm supposed to be talking about episode 16. The tragedy of Jeong-jeong here is that he's effectively lost faith in the beauty of firebending. He seems to consciously know the kind of concepts that the Sun Warriors will later teach. He is aware of that. Firebending should not draw on anger, and yet it feels to him like that's what keeps happening. All his students keep turning to rage and destruction. Zhao did. He is terrified Aang will do the same, and when Aang's the Avatar, what chaos would that lead to? Not once does Zhong tell Aang about the beauty of firebending, its positive aspects. Not once does he try to encourage that perspective, because he himself is too caught up in what he describes as a burning curse.
I've always wished I were blessed like you. Free from this burning curse.
You know, despite what he knows, Zhong has come to believe that firebending itself is bad, rather than some of the people who happen to use it. He thinks himself cursed with firebending, rather than blessed with waterbending that can bring healing, but it's not a curse. Whatever demons you have, Zhong, whatever guilts are inside you for your time in the Navy, you can't just absolve yourself by blaming all your actions on the fire. Argue that that's what curses you, and that if you retreat away from everything, now it's resolved. You just have to block out the firebending curse. No, you have to come to terms with your guilt and your personal actions. You were bad, not the firebending itself. It's only out of that self-awareness and then hopefully forgiveness that you'll ever dare to trust in firebending again. See that it can still be a force for good, and then for you to start actively using it for good. Right now, Zhong feels too afraid and too caught up in running from his guilt, and he then pushes that onto this 12-year-old boy. Sure, he doesn't outright tell Aang to never firebend, but it's entirely unsurprising that's the conclusion Aang reaches, sitting right in the spot where Zhong sat. If you look closely, this episode is kind of a tragedy in that sense. Only it also offsets how jarring a tragic ending could be in a kid's show via Aang's triumphant fight with Admiral Zhao to sort of lift the mood a bit. But at its heart, this is a tragedy, using the mechanics of its magic system to A. present a Zen-like philosophy of firebending that is a perfect emotional conflict for Aang's more impatient, excitable nature, B. an exploration of how fearing and shutting down our inner rage and negative impulses doesn't truly resolve them, and C. explore how one man's trauma can affect the younger generation that he has an influence over. I was going to make a short, perhaps kind of tenuous point about the fact he calls Aang weak. And this point is very flimsy, but I'm going to say it anyway. He calls Aang too weak to handle the wild, burning curse of firebending. But I feel like if this was the way Zhong once trained Zhao, calling him weak all the time, being such a hard disciplinarian, pushing in those sort of ways, I think that's an approach to teaching that would kind of frustrate Zhao even more, make him really keen to prove that he's not weak, to show that by demonstrating his firebending as he does this episode. He's so keen to show how powerful he is, it's a real insecurity there. All of Zhong's teaching approach kind of alienates Aang here as well. I'm not trying to say that like discipline approaches are always bad, but yeah, I think half the problem is Zhong being so caught up in his fear about firebending that he loses sight of the beauty and the importance of trying to teach that and instill that in his students. I think that's a part of this tragedy too. But yeah, because all of this is so intrinsically tied to the concept of firebending itself, none of that feels forced or clunky, and instead it makes firebending feel really alive here. An actual tangible thing people can have different feelings and beliefs in relation to. In that sense, the writing lesson here is don't forget to consider what the magic itself could mean in your story. What kind of themes and ideas could you express through it? What might people feel about it? Anchor everything back to the characters and the theme, and you'll probably be onto a winner. That's kind of what I take away from this episode, but there are also more things to say, so let me rattle through a quick few more. Quick few more? That doesn't sound like correct grammar. I actually really like that this episode begins with the gang visiting a Fire Nation festival. I think it's a great, more subtle way of humanising the Fire Nation and reminding us they do have an interesting culture beyond just wanting war. I think letting the kids have fun just wandering around there is a great idea, and I also love the guard captain being more concerned about how the festival went than in capturing the Avatar.
But other than that, the festival went off without a hitch. No fights? theft was way down.
I also even really like how stupid Aang is to intervene with the Firebender's magic performance. This is like a magician doing the "oh no, it's gotten out of control" trick for more tension, and Aang is young enough and panics enough over Katara to fall for it and intervene with his airbending. I like how often this show actually treats these children like the children they would be, rather than powering them up to behave like very mature 20-year-olds, because that makes the plot easier or whatever, you know? As kind of straightforward as the fight with Zhao is, just taunting him until he accidentally destroys his own ships, I still like it. It conveys an important point. I find it fully believable that someone like Zhao could be that easily tricked and that reckless, especially when his old master was just bigging Aang up in front of him.
You are no match.
I think I can handle a child.
I have never seen such raw power.
Zhong also pretty much disappearing at the end of this episode, not helping Aang fight Zhao, not some battle of the master and the students. He just leaves. On the one hand, I think it suggests that he does kind of trust Aang, but it also shows Zhong's fear and guilt again, to the extent he doesn't even really want to fight. I suppose fight fire with fire. You know, we don't see Zhong again until episode 18 of Season 3, where he is clearly a part of the White Lotus, and perhaps I'm wrong here. Perhaps this early version of Zhong meditating in the dark has been fighting the Fire Nation with all sorts of covert operations all this time, but my impression was more he had lost his way and lost all faith in really fighting to try and make a difference. That it was both in meeting Aang and later Iroh putting out a call for him that Zhong finally found his way back. To not be so afraid of destiny and daunted by the unforeseen outcomes of the ocean. And if I am right there, I think that's great. This is a great episode in my opinion. Based on the comments I've had before, I don't think anyone predicted I'd pick this as my favourite episode of Season 1, so on that basis I get the impression a lot of you don't rate it as highly. If so, why not? What are your thoughts on this episode? Honourable mentions of Season 1 that didn't make my top 3 are the Blue Spirits, the King of Amashu, the Southern Air Temple. I mean, there aren't any bad episodes, I don't think. I'd kind of like to do a ranking video, but they never seem to do too well on my channel, so maybe not. Maybe I'll do it as a Patreon or something, I don't know. What else do I say at the end of the videos? Yeah, subscribe, support me on Patreon if you fancy that, but otherwise, hopefully see you next time. And as ever, a special thank you goes to Grace, Luke Orr, Treat Ukeba, Michael Gallagher, Flying Spider, Kellyanne Davidson, Samara Salsi, Joshua C. Follier and Chad Bramwell. Thank you.